In the deep space where no human ship had ever reached, a strange and powerful alien ship moved silently like a giant predator hunting in the dark inside. That ship, a human soldier named Jack, sat alone in a cold metallic room, his hands tied and eyes calm. He had been captured 3 days ago during a small mission near a distant asteroid field. His team was killed, his ship was destroyed, and now he was a prisoner there. Aliens who captured him were tall, strong, and proud. They called themselves the Takai and believed they were the rulers of this part of the galaxy. They looked down at all other life, especially humans who they thought were weak and unimportant. The leader of this alien ship was a female warrior named Sarexa. She had golden eyes, sharp claws, and skin that shimmered like armor. She walked like a queen and talked like a hunter. Every time she entered the room, she looked at Jack with a smile that was not kind but full of pride and challenge. Jack looked back at her with no fear, no anger, only silence. As Sarexa found this strange. Most prisoners begged for mercy or cried for freedom, but this human just stared as if he was studying her and waiting for something every day. She came to him, spoke in his language, asked him questions, and laughed at his silence. She poked at his pride, called his people apes, and said humans would never rule anything in the stars. Said nothing. He watched, he listened. He remembered one day Sarexa brought a small group of her soldiers into the room. They stood behind her like statues, their weapons glowing and ready, but Jack did not move. As Sarexa stepped closer than ever before, she looked into his eyes and said, "Your kind is weak. You are like pets who think they are warriors. Say something human, show me your spirit." Jack looked at her slowly, his face calm, his eyes cold. He still said nothing. This made her angry. She leaned closer and tapped him on the forehead with her clawed finger, gently but full of insult. She laughed and said, "Maybe you are already broken. Maybe you are nothing then." Something changed. Jack tilted his head slightly. A strange smile appeared on his face, not a happy smile, but one that said, "Now it begins." He leaned forward slowly and spoke for the first time, his voice deep and quiet. "Keep poking me and see what happens." Sarexa blinked for a moment, surprised by his voice and his words. Then she laughed again, louder this time. Her soldiers also laughed, but there was a small shadow of doubt in their eyes. The next day, Sarexa returned again, alone. This time she brought no soldiers, just her own strength and pride. She entered the room and said, "I want to understand you, human. Why do you stay quiet? What are you hiding?" Jack gave no answer. Again she walked around him slowly, like a lion circling its prey. Then she stopped in front of him, looked him in the eyes, and placed her hand on his shoulder. She said softly, "I think your silence is fear. I think you are scared of Maine." That moment Jack moved fast, like lightning. His teeth sank into her hand, and he bit her hard enough to draw blood. Sarexa screamed and pulled back, her eyes wide in shock, her hand shaking, her blood dark blue running down her wrist. The door burst open. Her guards rushed in, weapons ready, but she raised her other hand and shouted, "No, do not touch him." The room fell silent. The guards froze. Jack sat back in his seat, calm again, as if nothing had happened. He looked at Sarexa and said softly, "Now you understand." Sarexa stared at him, breathing hard, blood dripping on the floor. In her culture, a bite was not just violence, it was dominance. It was a challenge. It meant, "I am not afraid of you." For the first time she looked at him, not as a weak human, not as a weak human, not as a pet, not as a prisoner, but as a rival. Jack had changed something that day, not just in Sarexa, but in the ship, in the air, in the silence that followed. The guards did not laugh now. They did not mock. They watched Jack with new eyes, eyes that said, "Maybe this human is not what we thought. Maybe he is something." Sarexa held her wounded hand, her golden eyes locked with Jack's, and for the first time she did not smile. She whispered, "You should not have done that." Jack whispered back, "Maybe you should not have pushed me." Silence between them was loud and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Something had begun, and it would not end. Easily, not here, not now. The ship floated through space like a silent beast, its metal skin glowing faintly under the light of distant stars. The crew inside moved with nervous energy, their perfect order shaken by one act, one bite, one human. Sarexa stood in the medical chamber, her hand wrapped in strange gel glowing softly while a machine hummed quietly nearby. Her face showed no pain, but something deeper. Her golden eyes stared ahead, not at the screen, not at her hand, but at the memory of sharp teeth and defiance. The council had not yet called her, but she knew they would soon. Word travels fast, especially when it smells like fear and shame. The other Takai warriors whispered now in corners, their proud voices low when they passed Jack's cell. They looked away, not with pity, but something new, something like respect or maybe caution. In his cell, Jack sat alone, his arms still bound but looser than before. The guards were fewer now, and they did not mock him. They watched him carefully, like he was not prey but another predator. He remembered the taste of her blood, not with joy but with purpose. It had worked just as he hoped it would. He was done being the silent captive. Now the game had changed. Sarexa entered without warning. The door hissed and she walked in, not like before, her steps slower, more measured, not weak but wary. Her eyes searched him like a puzzle. "She could not solve. You planned it," she said, her voice even but not calm. "You knew what biting meant to us." Jack raised an eyebrow. Not a word yet, but that same cold smile returned, the one that showed no fear, only intention. Sarexa stepped closer again. No guards, no weapons. She did not flinch as she moved toward him, her injured hand still healing at her side. "I studied your species," she continued, "your records, your history, and I still cannot decide what you are. Are you savage or strategic? Are you beast or soldier? Jack leaned forward and spoke softly, maybe both. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and slow. She narrowed her eyes. You do not act like the others we captured. They cry, they scream, they break. You do none of these, Jack replied. Maybe you never captured a real one before. She wanted to slap him, perhaps scream or strike or remind him who ruled this ship, but she did none of it. Instead, she pulled a small control from her belt and pressed it. The metal cuffs around his wrists opened and fell to the ground. He stood slowly, stretching his arms, his muscles sore but strong, his back straight as if he had never been chained. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you not fear? Yush looked at her with eyes that did not blink and said, because I understand what fear really is. And this is not it. Silence again, but it was different now. Not hostile, not cold, just filled with something that felt dangerous. And Alexa turned her back to him, walked to the viewing screen and pointed at a distant star system. That's where our homeworld lies, she said, strong and broken for 1,000 cycles, every species. We met, we conquered, we bent them to our will until now. She did not say the last part, but it echoed in the room like a ghost. Jack stepped beside her, stared at the same stars and spoke softly. Maybe that is the problem. You think dominance is survival. You think control is strength. She turned to him, anger flickering. You speak like a leader, but you are a prisoner. He replied, not anymore. The door opened again, this time not a guard, not a soldier, but a Takai elder, his robe flowing, his face carved with lines of age and wisdom. He looked at both of them slowly, then said, the council demands your presence, Alexa, and bring the human. They walked together through the halls, crew members stepping aside, their eyes wide. Not just at Jack, but at Alexa walking beside him, without chains, without guards, like equals, or maybe something else inside. The council chamber. The elders sat high above the air, thick with tension. One spoke, this human has broken tradition, he must be punished. Another said, he has shown disrespect, he bit one of our own, he insulted our race. Third leaned forward, but he showed courage and we value strength. Above, Alexa stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. I allowed it, she said. I gave him reason and I accept the result. He showed power and control. He acted like a warrior. Jack said nothing. He let her speak. He watched the room like a battlefield. Every glance, every breath was a move in a war of minds. The head elder looked at him. Finally, human, what is your intent? HFY replied simply, survive, understand, and if needed, fight. The room went silent again. Then the elder spoke, he shall live, but under watch. If he tries again, he will not leave this ship. Jack nodded. Once he understood, but something inside the room had already shifted. As they walked back, Alexa looked at him and asked, did you ever fear me? Jack replied, not once. She smiled a little for the first time, not cruel, not mocking, just curious and maybe a little impressed. The game was no longer predator and prey, no longer master and prisoner. Now it was something more dangerous, to forces locked in a silent storm, both learning, both watching, both waiting, and somewhere in the shadows of that alien ship a revolution was slowly being born. Asterisk. In the silence of space, the Takai ship drifted like a sleeping monster, but inside its halls a storm had begun, one that carried the name Jack, and whispered change through every corridor. The guards no longer laughed when they passed him. Their eyes were not filled with hate, but something colder, something like confusion. The kind of confusion that comes when your enemy stops acting like prey and starts acting like something else. Jack moved through the ship with quiet steps. He was still watched but not locked, still monitored but not caged. Alexa had allowed him limited movement and no one had dared to question her, not yet. The younger soldiers whispered in secret rooms. They had never seen someone like him, so calm, so sharp, so silent when he needed to be, and so loud when it counted. They started calling him the Ghost, not because he vanished, but because he made others disappear from the comfort of certainty. Alexa watched him too, from the command deck, from the shadows, from behind her golden eyes. She studied him like a living puzzle, each piece making less sense than the last. He had no weapons, no allies, no backup, yet somehow the entire ship felt like it belonged to him. Now she walked beside him down a long corridor lined with glowing walls and energy veins that pulsed like blood beneath the skin of a giant creature. She spoke with a voice colder than usual. They think you are dangerous. Jack did not stop walking. His voice was calm. Then maybe they are finally right. She paused slightly at his answer, a small twitch in her jaw, something close to respect or irritation or both. You are just one man. Jack looked ahead and said, sometimes that is enough. The war room. The council gathered again, but this time without ceremony. This time with urgency, their voices low, their faces tight with fear, masked as logic. One said, he has disrupted the chain of command. Another said, our warriors hesitate because of him. A third said, this human is a virus. Alexa entered with fire in her step and silence in her mouth. She listened as they argued, each voice striking the air like broken blades. Then finally she spoke, what if he is not a virus? What if he is a mirror? The room quieted at once. Eyes turned, not with agreement but with fear. They did not like mirrors. They liked power without reflection. Meanwhile, Jack sat in a private chamber surrounded by alien screens and glowing orbs that showed parts of the ship he should not have access to. He had learned more in 1 week than most of their spies did in years, and he had done it without breaking a rule. Just by watching, just by thinking. He found logs of other prisoners, Humans taken long ago, some never returned, some broken and discarded, some still alive but forgotten. In lower decks, his jaw tightened as he read the names, as he saw the images, as he memorized every face. One face stayed in his mind, a woman named Leah, soldier like him taken 5 years ago, declared lost. He closed the file and stood breathing slowly, then left the chamber with eyes that burned like purpose. He found Cerexa on the upper platform watching stars. Alone, her back straight, her armor off, only a simple cloak around shoulders. She turned as he approached, her eyes soft but her voice still sharp. "You have seen our secrets?" Jack nodded, then said, "I saw what you did to the others." She did not deny it. She only said it was war. He stepped closer, then asked, "Where is Leah?" Cerexa blinked once, then again, then whispered, "Lower deck, cell 9. Still alive, but not the same." Jack closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them with something new, something stronger. "Then take me there." She hesitated only for a moment, then turned and began walking, leading him through the ship, through steel doors and silent halls until they reached the lower levels where lights flickered and air felt heavier. In cell 9, a woman sat on the floor, her eyes staring at a wall, her body thin but not broken, her spirit hidden like a fire under ash. Jack stepped to the glass and said, "Leah." She turned slowly, her eyes dull at first, then wide. "Jack," she whispered. "Jack, is it really you?" He nodded once, then turned to Cerexa and said, "Open-eyed." She looked at him, looked at Leah, then pressed her palm to the console. The door hissed and opened, and Jack stepped inside, kneeling in front of Leah and placing a hand on her shoulder. "I came back for you." Cerexa watched them, her chest rising slowly, something strange moving inside her, a thought she had never allowed before. Maybe these humans were not just stubborn, maybe they were something else, something ancient and wild and unshakable. Jack helped Leah stand. His eyes met Cerexa's and he said, "One by one I will bring them all back." She asked softly, "Even if it means war?" He replied, "Especially if it means war." In that moment the air changed again. Something old inside the ship cracked a little and something new was born. The human problem had a name now, and it was no longer Jack, it was hope. The lights in the lower deck flickered like a nervous heartbeat, each shadow stretched too long, each sound too sharp. Jack stood in silence beside Leah, her steps weak but her eyes full of fire. Now the weight of captivity still heavy but shifting with every breath above them. The Tarkai ship remained quiet on the outside, but its holes whispered change. Its walls heard footsteps that no longer followed orders. Its doors opened slower now, as if unsure who truly held control. Cerexa returned to the command deck with her cloak tighter than before, her face unreadable, her thoughts louder than ever. She had freed a prisoner. Against the Council's will, she had seen weakness in her own system and a strange kind of strength in the human she once called beast. Moved through the halls, not as a guest, not as a captive, but as something new, something without a name. The guards did not stop him, the crew did not speak to him, and the walls seemed to learn his rhythm. Inside the maintenance wing, Jack met another alien, not Tarkai, but a quiet engineer from a lesser species, forced into servitude. His name was Rel, a creature with 4 hands and 2 minds who blinked in different patterns and spoke through a voice box that clicked like keys on an old machine. Had watched Jack since the bites, since the council, since the whispers had started. And when Jack finally approached him, the alien had simply asked, "What do you need?" Jack replied with one word, "Access." Rel gave it. Wires were opened, panels unscrewed, paths through the ship's nervous system began to appear, invisible to most but clear to Jack and to Rel, who understood that systems could be loyal but only to those who knew their nemesis. Cerexa watched from above. She had given Jack space but not freedom, her curiosity stronger than her caution, her instincts torn between loyalty to her people and something she could not define. In her chambers, she stared at a map of Earth rotating slowly on a screen. She had studied it for years as a possible conquest, but now it looked different, not because of its shape, but because of what had come from it. Jack returned to Leah's side each night, her strength returning slower than her will, her voice shaking but her mind sharp. She told him stories of her time in the lower decks, of the other humans, of the silence that broke men louder than screams. Jack listened and remembered. He started marking sections of the ship, not on the walls, but in his mind: escape routes, storage holds, transport bays, emergency pods, every detail stored, every risk measured, every moment watched with the eyes of a soldier and the patience of a survivor. Delivered tools hidden in food trays, buried in cleaning units, passed through hands that had once feared punishment more than they feared death, but now feared silence more than both. The spark had become a current. The council began to feel it. Meetings grew longer, arguments louder. Soldiers stood in corners with eyes darting to shadows they could not name. One elder demanded Cerexa end the experiment. Another warned of collapse, but no one moved. No one dared strike first, not after what they had seen, not after the bite. Jack met Cerexa in the gravity chamber, a place where weight could be shifted, where pressure could be changed, where truths could be spoken without the walls. Listening, she asked, "Why are you doing this?" And he answered, "Because someone has to." She said, "You are one man," and he replied, "And yet you keep watching." There was no anger in her voice now, only a question she had never asked herself: are we the strong ones, or just the ones who forgot how to fear? Jack handed her a small chip wrapped in cloth, a gift from Rel, a back door into the ship's core, a quiet key for a silent rebellion. He said, Keep it or destroy it, your choice. Alexa held the chip for a long moment, then closed her hand around it without a word. In the shadows of the ship, others began to move. A pilot changed a route, a cleaner left a door open, a technician slowed a scanner. They did not plan together, they did not speak, but they knew the rhythm of something old returning. Jack stood in a small observation room, looking out into space. The stars no longer distant now, they looked like choices, each one a possible future, each one a threat. Leah joined him, her voice still soft but her feet steady. She asked, "Are we ready?" And Jack answered almost. The escape was not a rush, it was a breath, a slow inhale of tension, a stretch of silence before the first step, and it began. With a power drop 5 seconds long, unnoticed by most, but enough to shift the doors, enough to crack the system's rail. Pulled the signal, Leah carried the tools. Saraxa watched the cameras and chose not to speak, not to stop them, not to help, but not to betray. Jack opened the hatch to the launch bay, the cold air rushing past his face like freedom. Calling, his fingers moved fast, his eyes sharper than ever. Each motion practiced, each second counted. They had not escaped yet, but they had begun. And once a beginning starts, an ending has no choice but to follow. Somewhere deep in the ship, a silent alarm blinked once, then stopped, unsure whether it had seen danger or destiny. Jack smiled, not because they were safe, but because they had finally moved, and movement was all they ever needed. The ship no longer breathed in rhythm. Its lights flickered out of sync, its engines hummed with a strange unease. The crew walked faster, spoke softer, watched every shadow like it might move without warning. The center held for now, but cracks ran under every panel, every hallway, every command. Jack stood inside the old cargo hold with Leia on his right and Rel tapping quickly on a broken panel to his left. The room was no longer storage. It was now a nest of stolen wires, old tech, and stolen pieces of a plan that grew louder with each hour. Across the ship, whispers had turned into quiet acts. A fuse delay here, a communication reroute there, nothing big enough to trigger alarms, but enough to cause doubt, enough to confuse the watcher. Saraxa stood in front of the mirror in her quarters, not to admire, not to dress, but to see herself, to study what stared back. Her hand still showed the faint scar where the bite had landed, where everything had changed. She traced it gently, not with pain, but with memory. She thought of the council and their orders, their warnings, their cold declarations that the human must be contained, must be silenced, must be erased. But even they had begun to falter, their words to sharp, their fear to Ludan. The training hall, 3 young Tarkai soldiers stood with weapons in hand. They spoke not of tactics but of the human, of the way he walked, of the way he watched, of the way he stood without flinching even when surrounded. They had never seen fear like that, and they were not sure if it was bravery or something worse. Jack moved between decks with a speed that surprised even himself. The layout of the ship now sat inside his head like a second skin. Every vent, every blind spot, every delay point, marked and remembered. Leah followed closely, stronger with each step, her eyes sharper, her past locked behind, but her fire burning forward. They found another prisoner on deck 5, a small girl with burns on her arms and silence in her mouth. She had no name, only a code, but Jack knelt and called her Ember, and that name stayed when she followed him without hesitation. The rebellion was not a war yet, it was a murmur, a vibration, a feeling in the bones of the ship that something had shifted and it could not be put back. Rel brought new data lines cracked in the core, unauthorized access from outside the Tarkai system. A signal had gone out and someone was listening. Jack smiled, not with victory but with purpose. They were not alone anymore. As Erixa stood before the council again, this time her voice calm, her posture unreadable. The elders barked questions, accusations, threats, but we only said one thing: the human has not broken us. We were already broken, he just showed us the cracks. Words hit harder than any weapon. Silence followed. One elder slammed the table, another stood and left. The others remained unsure of what they feared more, Jack or the truth. In a quiet wing of the medical deck, Jack met with 2 engineers, twins from a lesser race forced into servitude. They had watched him since the beginning, and when he asked for their help, they gave it with one condition: bring us with you when it starts. He nodded back in the cargo hold. Jack looked over the map again. Each route marked, each door timed. The launch pods were secure, the overrides in place. The plan was not perfect, but it was enough, because perfection was never the goal. Freedom was. Leah handed him a small device built from 3 stolen parts and 1 memory chip. It would scramble the internal sensors for 7 minutes. Just long enough. Just Baralissa. Rexa walked into the hold without warning, without guards, without fear. Her eyes locked on Jack, and she said, "The council knows you are moving. They want me to end this now." Jack said nothing. He just looked at her with eyes that held storms, not words. She placed something on the table, a command crystal from the upper deck, the kind only captains carried. She said, "You will need this if you want to fly the ship." Rel looked up, shocked. Leah stepped forward. Jack stayed still. Why Saraxa? Why now? She looked at them all, not as enemies, not as allies, but as something else, something rare. She said, "Because I want to see what happens when the stars belong to you." No one spoke after that. Saraxa turned and walked away, cloak trailing like the final page of a long-forgotten story. Jack picked up the crystal, placed it inside the control console, looked at Leah, looked at Rel, looked at Ember, looked at the others, gathering one by one, drawn by the soundless call of something ancient and Rel. The rebellion was no longer inside the ship, it was the ship, and it had just woken up. The lights on the command deck shifted from cold white to flickering orange, as if the ship itself felt the weight of what was coming. Footsteps Echoed louder walls seemed to breathe. Slower consoles blinked with warnings. No one had programmed the Takai vessel, once proud and untouchable, now pulsed with uncertainty. Jack stood at the center of the stolen control room, his hands steady, his breath slow behind him. Leah checked the map routes, open paths, blocked guards. Still unsure who they truly answered to, Rel worked the systems from a lower panel, his fingers tapping commands only machines could fully understand. Zerex was gone, vanished after delivering the command. Crystal, no alarms had followed, no guards chased her. Perhaps she had chosen exile, perhaps she waited in silence, perhaps she wanted to see how far he would go across. The ship whispers turned to movements. Minor officers hesitated when orders arrived. Major ones refused to act without clarification. When a door sealed itself shut, no one asked why. When a camera blinked off, no one checked the feed. The ship was not under attack, it was under question, and questions without answers become fear. Jack moved through the hall with Leah at his side, Ember following like a quiet shadow. They passed a soldier's tuck, trained and armed, but frozen as they watched him, not because of fear, but because of uncertainty in their eyes. He was no longer human. He was something else, something rising in the ship's lower wing. A group of prisoners had gathered, former test subjects, forgotten slaves, lost names. Jack had found them one by one, and now they waited, tools in hand, ready not for war but for release. Jack entered the engine control chamber, the room buzzing with raw power, the core thrumming like a beast held barely in chains. Rel followed, carrying a toolkit and a data rod. He whispered, "We have less than 20 minutes before the failsafes loop back. We do it now or never." Jack nodded once and turned to the core interface, placing the command crystal into the heart of the panel. The lights dimmed, the air shifted, the ship paused like it was listening for the first time in decades. He spoke softly, but the system heard, activating protocols, linking new command codes, rerouting systems. Jack was not taking the ship by force, he was convincing it to follow. The override finished, and for the first time, Jack stood not as a rebel, but as the new voice of the vessel, the captain, not by title but by action, the one who moved when no one else dared. Alarms blared across the top decks. The council had noticed, their seats shaken by data. They could not block their voices rising in panic. Not power guards were sent to retake the core, but found sealed doors and silence waiting in the training halls. Young warriors threw down their weapons and simply walked away, not out of weakness but out of choice. Some followed Jack without orders, without promises. They had seen enough to understand he was not trying to rule, he was trying to free. On the observation deck, Leah activated the launch sequence for the escape pods. A bluff, maybe, but a loud one, enough to draw attention, enough to split forces. Every second bot was a step forward, every distraction was a blade in the dark. Jack walked into the bridge, now glowing with red light, his eyes sharp, his jaw set. He looked at the crew still present, those who had not fled, those who had not sworn against him, and he spoke not like a prisoner, not like a thief, but like someone who belonged. This ship is not theirs anymore, it is ours, and we will decide where it goes. No one moved against him, no one raised a weapon. A crew member, a young one barely trained, stepped forward and asked, "Where do we go?" Looked out the main window, stars stretching wide like choices waiting, and said, "We go home." But home was more than Earth now. It was every name erased, every voice silenced, every life taken without reason. They would build home again, not on soil but on truth. In the control center of the council chambers, the elders barked their last orders. Their screens flickered and cracked, the power rerouted away from them, their rule unplugged. Not with guns but with knowledge, with will, with the slow, quiet refusal to obey. Zerexa appeared one last time on a side screen, her face calm, her voice unreadable. She said, "You did it now, take it and go before they remember how to hate." Jack gave no answer, only a slow nod and a glance toward the stars. The engines roared as the ship turned direction, once set for conquest, now pointed toward something else, something cleaner, something in. Ember stood by the door, holding onto a small railing, her eyes wide but her body calm. Leah placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled, not with comfort but with belief. Jack stood at the center of it all, one man, without an army, without armor, without promises, just purpose, and that had been enough. The tables had turned, not with war, not with fire, but with quiet strength and steady steps, and now the stars were listening. The stars stretched out like silent witnesses as the stolen ship broke from its old orbit. No longer a weapon, no longer a prison, now it was something else. Something claimed, something earned. The engines burned clean, the power was stable, the silence inside was not fear but focus. Jack stood on the upper deck, his hands resting on the rail as Earth slowly grew on the main screen behind him. Leah adjusted the signal relays, tuning the frequency to match old codes buried deep in human defense systems. Codes they were never meant to use again, but kept alive, like a flame in a storm. Rel worked quietly beneath the console, fine-tuning energy levels, linking alien technology to human protocols, his movements sure, his eyes bright with the joy of doing something no one had done before, not to destroy but to return. The ship answered to Jack now, not with submission but trust. He had not forced it, he had simply outlasted the ones who believed control came only through. Rember sat near the window, watching Earth grow larger each minute, her fingers gripping a small device made from scraps in memory. She had no words yet, no stories to share yet, but her presence was louder than any scheme. Message had been sent across space, across silence, across the unknown, and now Earth had answered. voice filled the ship, not digital, not broken, but warm. Welcome back, Jack. Welcome home. The crew, those who remained, those who had once been captors, now moved with purpose, their armor gone, their weapons stored, their orders changed, not by command but by choice. They followed Jack because he had shown them something stronger than Sorexa. Had vanished once more, her location unknown, her name still whispered by those who wondered if she had betrayed her kind or simply seen the truth before the rest. Now they called her Ghost, just like they had called Jack once the ship approached Earth's orbit and was met not by weapons, not by fear, but by silence, the kind that comes before understanding, the kind that waits to see if the past must repeat or if the future might break free. Leah stood beside Jack, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the signal feed. She turned to him and asked, "Are you ready?" And he answered, "No, but we go anyway." Sent another message, coordinates, instructions, clearance codes, all wrapped in a single sentence. "You are not alone." The Tarkai Council still searched for their ship, still barked threats into empty channels, still blamed Serexa, still feared Jack, but they no longer controlled the path of the stars in hidden corners of their empire. Small rebellions sparked not with explosions but with questions, with choices, with soldiers who remembered how it felt to hesitate. Jack knew they would come eventually. The Tarkai would not forget what had been taken from them. They would send more ships, more threats, more warnings wrapped in metal and pride. But Jack had something they did know. Had Earth, he had names, he had a story. As the ship entered the atmosphere, engines flaring, shields glowing, Earth's satellites aligned, the signal cleared, and human eyes looked up to see the impossible. A Tarkai vessel descending slowly, calmly, without aggression, without fire on the surface. A landing zone opened, cleared of threat, cleared of doubt, a welcome built from hope, not from orders. Jack guided the ship down, his hands firm, his breath steady. He remembered the cold metal of the prison cell, the taste of alien blood, the weight of silence, the spark of resistance. The first word, the last wound. When the ramp opened, Earth's wind touched his skin like an old friend, rough, familiar, real. He stepped down first, followed by Leah, then Rel, then Ember, then the others, once prisoners, now survivors, once forgotten, now home. People watched from behind barriers, soldiers ready but uncertain, scientists recording every step, leaders silent as history rewrote itself in front of Thema. Child in the front pointed at Ember and said, "She is like me," and Ember smiled for the first time since her name was given. Jack stood before the human commanders, his face calm, his voice steady. "This ship is not a trophy, it is a message. We do not kneel, we do not vanish, we do not forget." One general nodded and said, "We saw what you did. We read the files, we followed the signals." "And what now?" Jack asked. Now the general replied, "We listened." And they did. They listened as Leah told them what had been done, as Rel explained what could be built, as Ember showed them what had been stolen, and what had been saved. The ship remained grounded for now, but inside its walls humans worked, aliens helped, alliances born not of treaties but of survival. The sky no longer held one path. The stars no longer belonged to the loudest voice, they belonged to those who dared to reach. Jack returned to the deck each night, staring at the stars with eyes that remembered fire and silence and bite and hope. He had not won a war, he had started a future, and Earth had finally answered back.